Thank you all for coming to today's program. I know we're still more or less reeling from what happened in Hanoi, but today's program is a reminder that there is really a lot more going on in North Korea if we take a look at the issues beyond the nuclear issue. So today we're here to talk about North Korea's logistics revolution, what's been going on in the private markets, the Jangmadang, and the private transportation system, the Servicha. And our speaker today will really get a lot more into depth about how this is really is taking place in North Korea. This is a presentation that he largely based off of his work that he did for the HRNK, the Committee for Human Rights in North Korea. And we're happy at KEI to co-sponsor today's event with HRNK, including having our moderator for today's event being represented on stage. So I'll introduce them briefly, and then we'll get into the discussion in Yonho's presentation. Yonho Kim is the non-resident fellow here at KEI. Greg Scarlatoiu is the executive director for HRNK, and George Hutchinson is the managing editor, of the journal, the International Journal for Korean Studies. The newest edition actually just came out a few weeks ago. So the full bios are in the program flyer that you have with you. So I'll turn things over now to Yonho to start his presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Kyle. I'd also like to thank KEI and HRNK for giving me an opportunity to discuss my research findings on cell phone use in North Korea. Sponsoring with great sandwich out there. I always like sandwiches that KEI provides. Today, I'd like to discuss North Korea's logistics revolution, coming from the combination of cell phone and private ground transportation services. As you may have noticed in news reports, foreigners in Pyongyang are posting pictures and video clips of the people of the Hermit Kingdom on social media like Instagram and Facebook. And you can easily see North Koreans, even young students, talking on their cell phones in the streets of major cities in the country. So this is the cover of my first research paper on cell phones in North Korea. The picture was actually taken in Pyongyang by my former boss at USKI, Johns Hopkins. So as you can see, the young girls are just talking on their cell phones. And I would say the Hermit Kingdom is demonstrating at least some signs of a North Korean style digital transformation now. And when people come to know about this, they got very excited and started to ask whether there is going to be a Jasmine revolution-like changes in North Korea. And I said, probably not. Unfortunately, there has been no Korean Spring so far. There are no signs that the regime introduced cell phones as a means of reforming or opening up to the outside world. And cell phones are seen as expressions of the regime's confidence in its ability to control the society rather than capitulation, a sign of capitulation to market forces, or a de facto breakdown of information barrier. And the regime managed the pace and scale of mobile telecom service in a very careful and measured way. So the North Koreans are denied internet access, international calls are denied, phone calls are prohibited with foreigners visiting the country, and the foreigners must use a separate telecom network. And the regime blocked data transfer service until recently. And it resumed the service with the introduction of advanced smartphones made in North Korea. This is something I think, Greg, I have to make correction to in my report, but still, this means the regime has secured a technology to control and monitor the transfers of audio and video clips. And it's hard to imagine that cell phones and calls and text messages, if not all, are monitored by the security agencies. And authorities even confiscate cell phones for no reason in the street and return them to the owners, after censoring the phones. And the regime is getting smarter and technologically more capable in monitoring. Excuse me, let me have some water. Okay. So rather than discouraging people from using cell phones, I got the Hall's candy right before this presentation. I don't know why my heart beat. Sorry about that. So regime is getting smarter. And the pervasive government censorship made cell phone users practice self-censorship to avoid any risk. However, even with, the heartbeat. However, even with these strict constraints, cell phone and Changmadang went together very well. Indeed, the Changmadang people quickly understood that cell phone would become their lifeline. And already in the 1990s, during the famine among cross-border traders who were using illegal, at the time it was illegal Chinese cell phones, not even the North Korean cell phones, there was a saying that as long as you have a cell phone, you can survive. So they knew that the determining factor of business success was market information. And in that kind of circumstances, the construction of a North Korean cell phone network available to the people in the streets signifies a great opening of nationwide business opportunity for the merchants, Changmadang people. And combined with spontaneously formed private ground transportation services, this has led to rapid changes to the extent that they may be called the logistics revolution that we are going to discuss today, if not Jasmine Revolution in the Kim Jong-un era. So let me talk about the mobile telecommunication service first. The North Korean mobile telecommunications market has seen dramatic subscriber growth since late 2008, when they started the 3G service by Korealink, a joint venture with the Egyptian telecom company Orascom, which is suffering very much now there. The number of subscribers is now estimated at 4 million, around 4 million, meaning at least 2 out of every 10 North Koreans are using cell phones, which is phenomenal. But the exact number of subscribers is anyone's guess, because Orascom has stopped reporting the number after it reached 3 million in late 2015. After that, for some reason, they stopped releasing the number. But the Korean National Intelligence Service time to time reported their estimates to the National Assembly, and then the members of the Intelligence Committee, they just talked to the reporters, probably understood by the INS, and estimated numbers are released to the media time to time. We have Verizon, Sprint, and T-Mobile competing each other in the US, so why not a second cell phone service provider in North Korea? So North Korea began to build a second mobile telecom network called Gangsongnet. Gangsong is like strong, with the Ministry of Post and Telecommunication as the sole investor. So this is not a joint venture. And it started the service in 2013 under the name of Pyeol, star in Korean. and its subscribers are estimated around 1 million. Again, it's not independently verified, but it's estimation. Pyore's prepaid top-up cars are much cheaper than Korea Link, and North Korea deliberately downgraded the cell phone, the call quality of Korea Link to shift the subscribers to Pyo. This is a very nasty trick, but a natural conclusion for Pyongyang, the government, considering it doesn't want Orascom, the Egyptian company, to get the profit back to their home country, Egypt, in hard currency. And it is true that for the average citizen, the price of phones and service fees are quite burdensome. However, the cell phones have become one of the most conspicuous, noticeable examples of conspicuous consumption. So people have been purchasing cell phones at any cost, even youngsters. If you have very demanding youngsters, then as parents, even if you're not rich enough, there's no way denying their demand. So in North Korea, it is impossible for young men to find a girlfriend without a cell phone. That's the way it is in North Korea now. And cell phone has also changed the way merchants do their business. So they are now able to collect the real-time market information, including prices, exchange rates, and promptly respond to the changing market conditions by using cell phones. So negotiations are conveniently taking place over cell phone instead of having to meeting with your counterparts in person at the marketplace. So allowing decisions over price, quantity, shipping, or delivery methods over the phone. So you can no longer imagine doing business without cell phone in North Korea. Well, even the very poor Jangmadang merchants like Metugi, the grasshoppers, trying to evade the government's surveillance. And although you don't have UPS or FedEx in North Korea, there are even truck or bus drivers who do courier service for the merchants. All they need is the cell phone numbers of the shipper and recipients. This courier service allows the merchants to do business while sitting at home. They no longer need to visit the seller or buyer and carry their goods to the market themselves. So long gone is the term runner merchant, 달리기 장사꾼, as now with the phone numbers of your clients and drivers, you can operate your business as a so-called stay-at-home merchant. This is very important changes, I think, when it comes to the Jangmadang business pattern. So maybe someday you will see a successful North Korean CEO talking about how he started his business in his garage with this stay-at-home merchant concept. And let me discuss a little bit more about how this stay-at-home merchant or business was made possible in a country like North Korea. North Korea's transportation system traditionally centered around railway. As Kim Il-sung once said, railways are the arteries of the country. But with the economic crisis in the 1990s, the railway system was no longer able to properly function because of a lack of energy and deterioration of locomotives and the railway tracks. And by the way, these are mostly inherited from the Japanese colonial era, so decades-long locomotives or railway tracks. It became common for a train to run as slow as around 20 kilometers, again, 20 kilometers per hour, and stop frequently in North Korea, extending a theoretically one-day trip to a several-day adventure. However, the demand of people and product movement increased as North Koreans began marketization as their survival tactic. And as a result, private road transportation service began to develop. And business vehicles called servicha were introduced. The word comes from service and cha, meaning car in Korean. So that's how they come up with servicha, the word servicha. And by the 2000s, North Koreans started to say that the wheels make money and the drivers are making a fortune. So driver is really a popular job for the citizens there. No longer like party members. Unless you can make a lot of money, driver is better than them. So let me show you a picture of servicha. No safety rules there, I guess. Servicha expanded from freights, military trucks, to buses, vans, motorcycles, taxis, satisfying the various demands of the market of operating both short and long distance trips. Especially with the increase of the number of buses in North Korea, in the 2010s, a nationwide bus network has been created throughout the country, connecting major cities there. I don't have any picture of a servicha bus there, so this is what I found from Chungang Sunday. Another example of trucks there, just loading both freights and people there. Such changes are also gained momentum under Kim Jong-un's regime with the leniency on the market. So his father, Kim Jong-il, under his regime, North Korea went back and forth between tolerance and regulation over market policies. But Kim Jong-un switched his policy to actively utilize markets. So at least since 2014, there is almost no known broad-scale crackdown on vehicles for profits, meaning servicha. So rather, there was at least briefly even a concern for oversupply of servicha among the servicha business people. And not only Kim Jong-un's market policy, but also, no surprise, corruption helped the development of servicha. So in order to operate servicha, people must register their car with state institutions like military bases, factories, enterprises, because private ownership of vehicles, not only vehicles, but other things, basically private ownership is banned in North Korea. And state institutions allow we can call de facto owner, not legal owners, but de facto owners of the vehicle to operate servicha in exchange for vehicle registration fees and a cut from their monthly profits. So through this symbiotic relationship, the officials secure operational funds of their state institutions, accumulate private wealth, of course, and allow the de facto owners of servicha to operate servicha legally. But you're not done with the corrupt officials yet. You have to deal with the people at the checkpoint. So it doesn't matter whether you abide by all regulations at the checkpoint. It's impossible for servicha operators to pass through the checkpoints without offering bribes. So you have to periodically bribe the guards and officials according to your service frequency, and comply with the request for additional bribes. If they have a baby, the Koreans, they celebrate their first birthday and wait for a long time, and 60th birthday, really, very, great way. So probably this is another excuse to take money from the servicha, but that kind of events happens oftentimes. So in North Korea, people call the bribe sukje, meaning homework in Korean. So if the drivers of servicha don't do the homework at the checkpoint, you're considered to have low morals. So do your homework first if you want to be respected by the state officials. The good news is you're not always the victim of the corruption. Since the state-run gas stations are mainly concentrated in downtown Pyongyang and the suburban area and scattered throughout the provincial capitals and the main highways, you need to get your gas from illegal fuel traders when you're driving in the countryside. This is a gas station, Yonho 공급소 in Korean, available on Google, probably in Pyongyang. So we're not talking about this government, state-run official gas station. I'm going to talk about the smuggling, illegal fuel traders. So the traders either smuggle from China or Russia, if they're rich and powerful enough, or by the illegal outflow of fuel from military bases, oil reservoirs, factories, or enterprises. The military bases appropriate fuel by fabricating training time. And enterprises, for example, sell fuel received from the state to the market and buy back from the market when needed, if there's any inspectors coming in. For the market to work, telecom and transportation, that is cell phones and servicha in the North Korean case, are destined to go together. Its combination has created a synergy effect, complementing one another to greatly increase the efficiency. So to examine that, I tried to figure out the relationship between the main actors who are involved in the servicha business. And my questions were, what kinds of information are exchanged on cell phone among them? And how did the new communication tool change their behaviors? And this is what I have come up with. Can you see that? And this is what 중앙일보 draw. I mean, much better and fancier than the one I draw with my RA here. So this chart is available in 중앙일보. So let me go one by one. Let me start with the servicha operators. Obviously, the servicha business is centered around the de facto servicha owners and drivers. They have to communicate with their clients, shippers, recipients, fuel traders, government brokers, and checkpoint guards, and also their fellow servicha operators. First, let's take a look at the fuel trade. So in the past, the drivers had to carry barrels of gas needed for the entire round-trip, long-distance journey in the vehicle. So there was the inconvenience of not being able to maximize the total cargo load. But now you can call gas traders, if you have their phone numbers, near the point of departure, travel stops, and your destination to easily compare the gas prices. And then you can decide whether to load gas onto your car for the journey or purchase gas en route from the gas traders, illegal gas traders. And gas smuggling has also become less risky and more convenient. When there were no cell phones, one of my interviewees said that military vehicles delivered the gas barrels to his home at dawn so that nobody would notice. But he always had to fear of getting caught by the surveillance security officials. They're very good at doing their job, even if it is dawn. But even if he had a prearranged secret place, there was also a chance of getting caught by the security officials while waiting for the delivery of gas. But with cell phones, you can instantly determine the time and place to meet with the gas supplier and make any changes if needed. And for the gas trader, cell phones are also helpful in delivering gas to place without any specific address, especially when a driver calls you for gas delivery out on the road. A little bit more water needed. My heart is getting better. And brokers. Cell phones made the life of brokers, kogan in Korean, much easier. Brokers who connect the shippers and servicha for handling charges have been active throughout the region, all the regions in Korea, in North Korea. And this is what a former servicha driver told me. Before departing from Pyongyang, I would call the brokers in Wonsan to connect me to shippers who have goods to be sent to Pyongyang so that I won't return to Pyongyang empty-handed. Then, when the brokers sent me a few cell phone numbers of the shippers, I would call them to arrange the business. And after arriving in Wonsan, I would meet with the shippers at a restaurant to review what kind of cargo they are sending, whether they are controlled goods or not, and bargain the freight charge, and also decide who will be responsible for paying the driver's meals. This is one of the big factors for their negotiations. Also, a shipper will have to call a broker if he needs a servicha immediately. And when a shipper approaches the servicha operator directly without going through a broker, the servicha operator may want to call his broker to run a background check, believe it or not, to verify whether the shipper is trustworthy or not. And of course, with regular shippers, the servicha operators often arrange cargo pickups through a direct phone call. And the handling charge is paid by either the shipper or the servicha operator, but usually by the one who contacted the broker first. A broker can make easy profit once he can secure a good network of servicha and shippers. But there is a risk also. As the broker is responsible for any damages, he should bear the risks if some things go wrong in the introduction of the two parties. And you have certain layers of brokers here. So brokers well connected and with a good network. There are 몰입꾼 forwarders at the second tier broker. So they're the people who has not secured a good network of shippers and servicha. And they go around train stations, bus terminals, 장마당, or inns, looking for servicha passengers who are not familiar with the local servicha market. So the forwarders, 몰입꾼, connect the out-of-town merchants to a servicha that goes to their destination by asking their contacts using a cell phone. And then they get handling or facilitation fees from the servicha operators. And cell phones are also playing an important role in forming and invigorating a cooperative network of servicha operators. Of course, you don't have Facebook or Twitter in North Korea, but enough information exchange is actively taking place among these servicha operators on cell phones. So for instance, they can scratch each other's back in repairing vehicles or sharing spare parts. And if an unexpected events occur at the checkpoints, phone calls are made to notify their colleagues who are operating along the same route. And speaking of checkpoints, offering a bribe is not always enough. When illegal cargo is discovered or an order of a strict enforcement of the rules passed down from the top, in those cases, the servicha driver immediately contacts the shipper to explain the situation. Then the shipper calls the recipient of the delivery to discuss countermeasures. If the de facto owner of the servicha has connections with high-level officials, for example, of the Ministry of People's Security, he can contact them directly to describe the situation. And then the high-level official would call a mid-level official to order the immediate release of the servicha detained at checkpoints. And this, I heard a very funny story here. One defector told me that he passed through the checkpoint by calling a broker to find out the name of a high-level official at the Ministry of State Security. And he lied to the guard that he was the nephew of that official. So not everybody can take that kind of risk, but he must have been very bold and lucky. Now let's turn to the servicha users. For them, the greatest benefit from the widespread of cell phone use is the ability to compare freights in real time to select the best suited servicha. You no longer have to go in person one by one to check the freight charges. So the users make a direct phone call to the servicha operators or brokers to ask for the departure time and date, freight charges or passenger fares, vehicle types, and seat availability. And using cell phones, the users also share the information with each other, including trustworthiness of servicha operators. And the active exchange of information naturally creates a fair and reasonable prices in the servicha market. But when there are people running, there are always people flying over them. 뛰는 놈 위에 나는 놈 있다, a famous Korean proverb. So the servicha operators sometimes collude with each other through cell phone conversations to fix prices. This is what a former servicha operator told me. If the same amount of 7 metric tons of coal is loaded, and yet my freight charge is lower, the other owner would lose business. Do you think any owner would just stand by and watch? To prevent such events from happening, we fix the price of cargo per metric ton in advance. And what if they cannot reach an agreement? And that's when threats and violence come in. So you got to be very tough to survive in the world. And next, the communication between servicha drivers and their clients. Unexpected situation may occur, as I briefly discussed during the long-distance operation of servicha, vehicle mechanical problems, a flat tire, detainment at checkpoints. If that happens, the driver has to call both his shipper and the recipient immediately to explain the situation. And the clients then can quickly take responsive measures to minimize the negative impact. If the driver irresponsibly failed to communicate on the situation, then the servicha will lose its credibility, not only with that one specific client, but also with the whole community with servicha users, because the information spreads out very quickly. In order to gain credibility and reassure the shippers, it is necessary to make a phone call from time to time to their shippers and recipients, even every hour or at least once every few hours, and inform them on the current location and the estimated arrival time. They don't have UPS app, but Korean style service is available there. So this is how the combination of servicha and cell phones has completely changed the concept of logistics in North Korea for the merchants, and how sedentary business has become a new mode of business and transaction there. And one defector, one of my interviewees, even used the expression, a paradigm change. So it was really a revolutionary change for them. So this new system of logistics has brought about some changes. So first, specialization in the distribution stage. So the market players have come up with a division of labor and role assignment while dealing with shipping, transporting, receiving, and selling. And as a result, costs have been reduced, risks have been distributed and mitigated among the players here. and cargo volume has expanded, and quick product supply has been made possible in response to changes in market conditions. And these structural changes inevitably led to expansion of trade volume. And this is what one of my interviewees told me. Since telecommunications have developed, you know how much the same product costs in different places. So if a product is more expensive than the average price, it will not sell. So given the increasing number of merchants, the person who sells goods in large quantities may see more profit than someone who is selling based on price differences only. So in other words, someone who has the capacity to trade in bulk makes more money. So a small profits and quick returns approach has emerged as a new and winning sales strategy among the merchants. And the combination of servicha and cell phone also led to a new method of private money transfer, such as sending settlement costs in cash through servicha drivers. And they call it 이관돈, or transfer money. And the drivers, of course, in return, take transfer fees. Due to the relatively large cargo traded and transported by servicha and the sedentary business, resulting settlement costs also became very high. So in the past, it was very difficult to imagine entrusting the delivery of a large amount of cash to another person in North Korea. And it is understandable because there was even a running joke in the past that anyone who gets money back that was lent is a hero of the People's Republic. So, this kind of business was not imaginable in the past. However, today, the shipper, recipient, and driver can communicate with each other using cell phones to verify accurate money delivery. And this also gives more incentive to the drivers to ensure flawless delivery of money in order to maintain, again, their credibility. As you may have noticed, I used this word credibility or trustworthiness many times. It was not intentional, but this is based on my interviews with the defectors. This specific term just popped up often and often when I interviewed them. So the combination of servicha and cell phones has facilitated long-term and stable trade relationships among the merchants and developed a credit-based logistic system. So once you lost your credibility, there's no way you can survive as a servicha operator, broker, or shipper. And the expansion of the trade scale has increased the risk. The expansion of the trade scale has increased the risk of business failure. As a result, it is difficult to guarantee the operation of the new logistics system without much needed credibility again. So in fact, in order for the market to develop, you need contracts, written or oral, to be fulfilled. And in a normal society, the predictability of trade relationships must be secured through legal and institutional arrangements supported by the government. But the North Korean state is unable to properly provide these kind of services. Ironically enough, the predictability of trade relations in North Korea, especially in the market, as we discussed, has been made possible through the awakening of the self-interested market players who realized the importance of credibility in the trade relationship cycle. And they pressured for the prevention of fraud using rapid information exchanges on cell phones. And this is kind of shocking and very interesting changes, given the fact that the Jangmadang used to be known as the hotbed of various fraudulent activities. In the past, selling adulterated food and cheating the scales were common at the Jangmadang and often leading to a brawl. The will to provide satisfactory service for clients in order to create a stable, long-term relationship was a rare sight in North Korea, and especially among the Jangmadang merchants. So I think we have to pay close attention to these changes and how these changes will ultimately impact North Korean society in the future. Let me stop here, and thanks for listening.
All right. Well, Yonho, always great to hear you presenting. I'd like to remind our distinguished audience that Yonho's paper is available on our website, hrnk.org. Under HRNK Insider, great to see good friends, HRNK board members, Ambassador Robert King, Colonel David Maxwell. Before I ask Yonho a couple of questions of my own, and we turn it over to the audience, would like to hear George Hutchinson's comments. He has been following Yonho and his work for quite a while. I believe you were at the Korea Club meeting as well when we featured his paper. So, George, I'm going to turn it over to you first.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah, thank you, Greg. And thanks to HRNK, KEI, for the opportunity to discuss Mr. Yonho Kim's well-researched topic today concerning North Korea's logistics revolution, and a very apt term, and we'll get to that here in a second. But I'd also like to congratulate Mr. Kim for his important contribution to the field. So in my brief remarks, and then we'll get to, I think, an open forum a little later, I'll start by describing how the paper contributes to the literature on North Korea. I'll then point out some specific areas where these contributions apply and how they help us understand the integrated marketization, the phenomena that's currently occurring right now in North Korea. And then I'll conclude by proposing some areas, and some of you may be interested, in further exploration made possible through Mr. Kim's research on North Korea's revolution. So for most of us, there's a very thick layer of available information that we have to navigate and kind of work our way through to better understand events inside North Korea. Currently, the media and frankly, much of the intellectual discussion here in the policy establishment continues to focus on denuclearization negotiations, the ongoing symmetry between President Trump and Kim Jong-un, and the prospects for continued North Korean nuclear, ballistic, and testing development. Yonho Kim's report, on the other hand, punches through this thick band of high-level noise and takes us straight to the grassroots of real change that's taking place inside North Korea today. And I think that's very important because much of what he has in his report, and I'll admittedly, I've read it a couple of times, and Greg mentioned it's on the HRNK Insider webpage. Please read it. I read it and was impressed. We went to the Korea Club dinner, and I heard his presentation. I read it again before this event, and it really hit me just how well he was able to integrate not only the cell phone piece, but the serve each other logistical piece as well. The study's timing is critical. It comes at a time not long after Kim Jong-un has shifted his focus from nuclear testing and the years of regime-imposed belt tightening that he's imposed on the North Korean people, ostensibly to shore up his legitimacy as an economic reformer for the North Korean people. But Yonho's report takes us directly to these people and their market activities. So whether you're a practitioner here in the DC area researching and analyzing North Korean marketization trends, or you're simply interested in understanding North Korea-related developments to help inform policy or academic understanding, Yonho's work is important in a couple of big ways. First, the study adds to the existing literature and helps shed light on the puzzle of North Korean marketization and growth of the Changmadang. But in addition, the report fills an important gap in our understanding as it integrates research on cell phone use and proliferation of private transportation services, the Sabicha, to present a complete logistical picture where cell phones are being increasingly used to communicate and exchange information that connects the actors that make up the market, the overall market, the market which is further segmented into separate shipping, transport, wholesale, and retail sales markets. And in his paper, Yonho Kim provides a logistical model that captures all of this as it's optimized against the current constraints that are posed by the North Korean regime. Now, I mentioned the apt term logistics revolution, and this is appropriate because if you're familiar with logistics, as many of us are, what is occurring inside North Korea really is a logistical model. It's not just the use of cell phones. It's not just the use of vehicles to try and earn money off to the side. It's a logistical model that's creating marketization. In business vernacular, logistics represents the movement of goods along a supply chain, and the supply chain is shaped through the forces of supply and demand. And it's essentially getting goods delivered at the right time, at the right place, at the right amounts, and at the right price. And this is exactly what's going on in North Korea, in a sense that if you read his report, sure, it's not the type of business model that you'd expect to see anywhere else, but North Korea. It involves information, transportation, inventory, storage, handling, packaging, suppliers, and customers. And this is precisely what is happening, all of which Mr. Kim captures nicely in his report. I'm going to probably refer to him more as Yonho because there's some references to Kim Jong-un in here, and sometimes they're in the same sentence in the same paragraph, and I want to make sure I'm not conflating the two. But now, for some specific areas, and this is getting down a little bit into the weeds, where Yonho's study can enhance our understanding of the marketization that's occurring inside North Korea. One of the most significant things about the paper for me, as I read it, was that it highlights the growing symbiotic relationship between the regime officials and the Changmadang generation. And this interdependency is unique. Regime officials essentially are taking bribes, and regime institutions essentially becoming growingly reliant on fees and kickbacks. So it's a situation right now where these institutions, the officials, they really are relying on the success and the growth of marketization. And those comprising the Changmadang, the people, many of whom are North Korean millennials who survived the famine of the 1990s and have been self-reliant since the collapse of the public distribution system, have a capitalist, and no kidding, capitalist mindset. And since the North Korean regime is not providing, as it had originally promised during the Kim Il-sung, Kim Jong-il periods, rather than the Changmadang being dependent on the regime is actually growing increasingly dependent on the success of the Changmadang. And as a result, the regime is not in a secure position to crack down very hard on the markets, hence they risk the killing the goose that lays the golden egg. Another important point that the paper highlights is the direction in which change is occurring. There's some comparisons. In fact, we had a conversation about this at the Korea Club the night you gave your talk about North Korea trying to adopt the Chinese model of marketization. But unlike the top-down driven reforms by Deng Xiaoping that began the marketization process for the Chinese in the 70s and 80s, change in North Korea is occurring from the bottom up. And if bottom-up business as usual market activities continue in North Korea, the regime will face pressure to allow even more mobility and more access to the people making up the Changmadang in order to extract increasing levels offered, the increasing success offered by the markets. Therefore, we find that increased marketization is creating a new capitalist class whose objectives are simply not in alignment with the state. And these new capitalists are incentivized to preserve and hide their wealth as it accumulates, while finding ways to avoid the interference imposed by the regime. So the question will be, how much bottom-up pressure can occur from the inside before the regime winds up losing its authoritarian grip? And this leads to a third important point highlighted in the paper. As the Changmadang strengthens throughout North Korea, and this is a phenomenon, it's just not happening in certain sectors, it's happening throughout the country, the state apparatus and its controls appear to be weakening across the board. Yonho Kim notes that credibility and reputation are important factors to be a successful player in the market now in North Korea. In other words, corrupt behavior could ruin a reputation and doom future business opportunities if you're a broker or if you're a sobicha operator. On the other hand, the growth of the markets is succeeding in part because of the corruption from the regime and the officials. So while the ethical practices and institutions are strengthening in the market space, the regime, on the other hand, is growing more corrupt as a result of the market success. And resultingly, the state's ability to coerce and control market activities continues to grow weaker. The ability of the regime to use propaganda for control purposes is increasingly undermined by the enhanced mobility of the Changmadang and their access to outside information, media. In fact, the whole Sangbun classification system is somewhat jeopardized due to the mere fact that many of those capitalizing on market activities and growing wealthier as a result are from the lower Sangbun classification echelons. And this means that it's the upper echelons of the system that are growing more dependent on the lower echelons. And then finally, a quick word. If you read Yonho's report, particularly for those of you involved in academia, a quick word about the methodology and the data used in the study. Yonho was very careful in his use of the data that was selected for the study. It comes from a variety of sources, defectors who defected from the years, and correct me if I'm wrong, 2012 to 2016, with experience in the market, in various aspects of the market, but these are the years after Kim Jong-un came to power. And I think this really helps to strengthen the validity of your report. So I'm going to get to a third area quickly. Some items I think that merit further exploration, areas made possible only through Yonho's careful research. First, I think further research could look at the adjacencies between North Korea's market economy and its withering command economy. At what point does the bottom-up market economy and then the industrial component of its top-down command economy meet? In a hybrid economic system like North Korea's, at what point in this hybrid system does the socialist portion of the economy become absolutely overwhelmed because it's the dependency on the capitalist portion? I think this is a very important thing for policy planners to understand. Second, could Kim Jong-un institute reforms similar to those that have been introduced in China without repudiating the legacy of his father and his grandfather, and without losing total control of the system? In other words, what would it take for Kim Jong-un to reform and incentivize in a way that enhances his legitimacy while still maintaining a consolidated grip on power? Are there legitimate scenarios where this is even possible? And third, if progress in nuclear negotiations moves forward, let's say, and the UN, theoretically, were to agree to partial sanctions relief, would relief that is carefully chosen to directly aid the activities of the Changmadang, directly or indirectly, allowances for raw materials, fuel, foodstuffs, that type of thing, ground mobility type fuels, could it perhaps counterintuitively help to strengthen marketization while further weakening the regime? That's an area I think that should be looked at. And then fourth, for further research, could advanced spatial analysis, for those of you who are familiar with GIS or other techniques, could that be used to better understand the cluster and vector characteristics of the markets and shipping routes to gain a more comprehensive understanding of the breadth and the depth of marketization that's currently occurring? And last, to what extent, you mentioned the state monitoring cell phone utilization, to what extent are cell phones being monitored internally by the state? And could monitoring be used as a means for a comprehensive crackdown by the regime if it felt threatened, overly threatened by the Changmadang? And then what would a crackdown potentially lead to? Good. I'd like to thank HRNK and KEI again and congratulate Yonho Kim for an important contribution.
George, thank you very much. Before we turn it over to the audience for questions, Yonho, if you have any answers in reaction to George's remarks, I would also like to ask each of you a question. Yonho, you have mentioned that the two key words that came up in most or all of your interviews were credibility and trustworthiness. You have given us an excellent idea of the nuts and bolts of how business is run. We know that entrepreneurship is alive and well in North Korea, despite very adverse circumstances. But all of these developments, the marketization of North Korea, this nexus between quasi-private transportation and cell phones, how do they affect the way North Koreans interact socially? This society, as engineered by Kim Il-sung, was not built based on trust. How does this all affect the social dynamics of North Korea? George, you mentioned Songbun, North Korea's system of social classification. You said that perhaps these market forces are even eroding the Songbun system of social classification. On the other hand, you mentioned that this has not been a top-down phenomenon. This has been, the marketization of North Korea has been a bottom-up survival mechanism, pretty much. As we know from the report of the UN Commission of Inquiry, the majority of the market agents are married women. The UNCOI report points out that many of the women at the markets are experiencing a new type of discrimination at the hands of women of higher Songbun who are basically in control of the markets. So in a society where there is no private property, in a society where entrepreneurship exists, but each and every type of conceivable entrepreneurial activity is still criminalized pursuant to North Korea's criminal code, punishable by up to 3 years in a political prison camp. Of course, these activities are tolerated. We heard about the corruption, but is it really too soon to say that the Songbun system has eroded? Would it be fair to say that in order to be successful, in order to be a successful market agent, you still need the protection of state institutions, you still need the protection of those of higher Songbun? Thank you. Yonho.
Yeah, it works now. The big lesson, the most important lesson I learned today is do not take horse candy before your presentation. It was really close, but I think I successfully finished my presentation. Let me start with Greg's, your question, credibility and trustworthiness. I asked follow-up questions, exactly what you asked to my interviewees. How did this credibility thing enhance your conversation with your business partners? And they said, you know what, before, in the past, you don't want to talk any politically sensitive topics with your business partners, only your family members or close friends who you're convinced that they are trustworthy. But based on this long-term relationship and convinced that they are trustworthiness, you can start to talk about a little bit of political topics, they said. So I think that create some kind of crack, if you will, in the political conversations among the people. And maybe this is not that directly related, but one of my interviewees was actually involved in prohibited items like DVDs with Korean movies. So it was illegal and it was really risky business. But she also used Servicha and cell phones. And in a way, she was abused by the driver because there's no way she can complain about the drivers. For example, the driver, every 1 or 2 hours, he called this merchant and asked for more money. I'm out of gas, which she doesn't believe because she already gave him more than enough gas that was filled. But there was no way she can complain about that. So it's really a complex situation here. But some of my friends said, "Oh, I can see some potential, ways to circulate these prohibited items. That's for the activities. I think activists to further their job." And sanctions relief targeting Changmadang, I don't think there's any silver bullet. Even if your intention was very, streamlined and very well targeted, there's no guarantee that that action would prop up or in a way, help the regime. So again, there's no silver bullet. If you decide on certain measure, you also need to take some risk. That I would say. And at what point the socialist command economy would transform to a more capitalist economy. I was told nowadays North Korean people, they don't know what the state official prices are for their everyday items. They only know the market prices because they don't have to know about the state official prices. And also the state institutions, when they are involved in the market activities, again, they don't rely on state official prices. So in a way, in that sense, the socialist economy is already collapsed. But it depends how you define the socialist economy. But again, you can see a huge crack here going on. I think one of the points I tried to make in my report was you cannot draw a very clear demarcation line between the state and market in North Korea, because even though the Changmadang people, the small and poor merchants, they are complaining about the state disrupting their market activities by mobilizing, for the labor campaign, or just try to regulate the hours they can do business at the market. The wealthier merchants like Tunju, the master of money, who are actually dominating the business, they are really connected to the government officials, or sometimes they themselves are the government officials, or spouses, or extended families of the government officials, and they have really closely tied symbiotic relationship. So just based on this dramatic market activities going on in North Korea, you cannot simply say, oh, so we're just getting closer to the collapse of the regime, or the regime stability is at risk. I don't think that kind of conclusion you can easily make. We have to be very careful when we are trying to make conclusion on that.
Thank you, George.
Greg. So I'm going to take a stab at your question. My light's on, but my mic's not working. Can everybody hear me okay? I think I'm speaking loud enough. So, so Greg asked a very important question that involves the particular vulnerability of the women who, frankly, are really spearheading the market activities as we know them. I mean, they're the vanguard. They're the folks that really are doing the bulk of the smuggling back and forth from China to North Korea. They're the bulk of the defectors, I think, right now, percentage-wise, are the women. Not a good answer at all to provide the audience. I'm very interested in what the audience might have to say, what Yonho's comments might be, and Craig, what your comments are on that. But I think that this is part of the story, that right now, I mean, the populace, this lower echelon in the Sungbun system is very vulnerable, and the women are particularly vulnerable. And it makes, it goes right at, the shameful fact that, right now, the human rights issue really is not at the forefront of the discussions that are ongoing relative to the nuclear piece. But it highlights the important work that your organization is doing, KEI is doing, and that story needs to continue to be driven home of not only human rights writ large, but the stories that as they relate to groups like the women. I certainly don't see the Sungbun system disappearing overnight, but what I think's happening and what marketization is doing, I think it's putting a spotlight on how ludicrous the whole notion of a Sungbun caste system is when those at the very top of the ladder are dependent on those who are making things happen at the bottom rungs of the ladder. Yeah, so I mean, not a great answer. I wish there was a better answer to provide. But,
Well, thank you, George. We're now ready to take questions from the audience. Please do remember to wait for the running mic before you ask the question. We'll go first to Ambassador Mark Fitzpatrick, then we'll take your question. Please.
Thanks very much. No ambassador, but KEI board member. Brilliant, interesting presentation. Starting with the very word sobicha, that they would use the English word. It's fascinating. It reminds me of the Japanese word for business suit, seibiro, from Seville Road in London. In a sense. But my question goes outside the economic realm to the political. All this activity, the expansion in cell phone use, the availability of gasoline to service the business, it's all happening despite what is supposed to be maximum pressure of sanctions, including on petroleum and so forth. Mr. Hutchinson asked the question if there was some resolution, a partial resolution that allowed for trade with this spur greater activity. I guess my question is the reverse. Are the sanctions creating conditions that make it important for this market activity to flourish in this way, or do you think it would flourish even more if there was not the sanctions, or are the sanctions just irrelevant? Are we deluding ourselves that maximum pressure has any impact?
Thank you for the question. I expected this question will come up, and my answer is I don't know, but I do know the debates. One of my friends in Korea, he did some kind of survey of the prices in North Korea, just selected items, and the findings was the items domestically available, the prices are relatively stable, but the items that you totally rely on, for example, imports from China, then the price is not that stable enough. So maybe steadily increasing, or at least people have lost their trust again in the stability of prices. So in that way, I think sanctions work, but I don't hear any screaming from Servicha business people complaining about lack of fuel. If that happened, then you would see by now hikes in fuel prices, which we haven't seen yet. So there must be some loopholes in the sanctions regime, especially when it comes to the fuel supply to North Korea. Maybe ship-to-ship transfer, that's very famous, and the UN Security Council panel of experts, they already reported that. So they do have some, they're utilizing, taking advantage of that kind of loopholes. And probably North Korea, they have accumulated enough amount of hard currencies from their trade relationship with China before the sanctions really took effect. And it's anybody's guess how much of hard currencies they have accumulated and how much are available now. So it's ongoing debate, and whether the sanctions work or not, it depends which part of the North Korean economy you're looking at and what kind of points you want to really make. Thank you.
Great. Yes, we'll take your question next. Then we'll go to you, sir. And we'll go to Daniel Wirtz.
Voice of America. According to the presentation, it seems like the market economy has developed through the combination of cell phones and servichas. I think you briefly mentioned this, but how do you think this will make an impact to destabilizing the controlled economy in the long term?
Oh, of course. Do you want to jump in?
No, please, I'll defer to you.
So at the end of the report, I think I mentioned the potential long-term effect. Just focusing on the combination of servicha and cell phones, you can easily imagine that this illegal fuel supply is not sustainable if you have a expanding market economy and more and more demands. Let's forget about sanctions for now. But if that's the situation we are going to face, then the illegal fuel supply is not sustainable. So they have to, the regime, I think, has to deal with this, how to legalize and establish a systematic fuel supply. And I think that directly goes to the sanctions regime. So I can see one big need for the regime to make a deal on nuclear negotiations. Maybe this is not the only target, not only goals, but probably one of the things they want to consider. And the road and even rail system, again, if the regime sees a big opportunity and they're confident that this is not destabilizing the regime, but in a way benefiting and some profits they can pick up, then they would be really eager to modernize their roads and railway system. And that's why I think they asked South Korea to help them out. The road condition, probably you remember, sorry, it's a little bit longer than I expected, but I cannot exclude this part. Kim Jong-un, when he met with Moon Jae-in for the first time, when the world was watching his mouth, and he definitely knew that, he confessed the embarrassing condition of North Korea's road and railway system. Probably very measured remarks. At the end of the day, if you have this growing market economy, you have to modernize your infrastructure, including road and railway. And the statistics available by now is like in 2006, only 3% of road in North Korea are paved. So really a lot of work to do. And the merchants are really eager and able to import large trucks. But for now, the load limit of 20 metric tons is the largest truck they can import, because the road system doesn't support any larger trucks. Even if you have a lot of money, doesn't matter. That's the situation they're in now.
Yes, George, please.
Okay, I'm going to add to that real quick, if I could. I'd like to try and combine the last two questions to answer that question. So Kim Jong-un has stated that he's seeking sanctions relief in return for, I think, shutting down a portion of the Yongbyon facility, but clearly needs some form of relief to try and get things moving in the economic sphere. And it goes to the issue of the adjacencies. Right now, if you look at the marketization that's occurring, it's mainly with things that you would find in a typical, outdoor market, food, clothing, materials like that. The heavier industry, and this goes to the adjacency. The heavier industry, obviously the defense sector is not something that the market's going to take over. But at what point does the market efficiency start to creep in to these adjacent spaces that are now being occupied by the top-down driven system, the socialist system, the demand economy? That's the area that really where I think you're going to find your answer. And it goes to the issue of careful sanctions relief. And I'm clearly the sanctions, as they've been carefully crafted over the last several years, are having an effect, and they're doing what they've been intended to do. Kim Jong-un has said that, and he needs relief in this case. So how could there be careful, very, very careful relief that would target that spot that could potentially move into spaces that are adjacent to markets? There's where I think the answer lies.
Steve Winters, independent consultant. On his trip to the north, one of the trips, President Moon took along, many top officials of the chaebol conglomerates who met with the North Koreans. And we recently had a talk here at KEI by someone who went with President Moon, and he reported that the officials in North Korea, the top officials, were extremely enthusiastic of talking directly to these chaebol officials, even to ignoring the diplomats to a certain extent. So clearly the government in the North is looking in this direction for what might happen. And if Hanoi had gone differently, it might be happening right now. So the question is, what if something, the sanctions are removed and some agreement is reached, then what do you think will be the role of the market that has developed there, which is on a pretty, it's an interesting level, but it's certainly not, on the chaebol level or something. The point being, it might be that in retrospect, this was a brilliant plan by Kim Jong-un to sort of bootstrap or jumpstart the what's going to happen after the sanctions are removed with the chaebols moving north and also other foreign investors, Chinese, by getting the population used to the idea of a market economy so that it isn't, they're going 100% from socialism one day to capitalism the next day. But they'll probably disappear to a great extent once these international conglomerates set up. How do you view that possibility? Something's going to happen. What's going to happen?
I don't have my crystal ball that can answer that question, but I can say kind of immediate calculations that might be going on inside the chaebol community. Actually, I was approached by people from South Korean chaebol, when I released this report, because they're really trying to get prepared for possible inter-Korean economic cooperations. But as we have been witnessed, they have been very careful. Nobody wants to cross the line and get the first shot. And think about Orascom, the Egyptian telecom company, which is losing, maybe not losing money, but failed to get their the profits which they deserve. At first, the Orascom chairman, I think he was pretty much convinced that he's going to rake in huge amount of money in North Korea, because Kim Jong-il, he personally took picture with chairman and blessed their business in North Korea. But see what happened. So unless North Korea establish a really strong credibility in dealing with foreign investors, South Korean chaebol, they wouldn't. I mean, the Korean government would support in a way, but I don't think that's enough.
And of course, since HRNK is one of the co-sponsors, these are global enterprises. They cannot just invest in a human rights black hole. You cannot be running a chaebol operation next to a political prison camp. Undoubtedly, what North Korea needs. Thank you. It is your turn now. Undoubtedly, what North Korea needs prior to realistically receiving significant foreign direct investment is comprehensive economic, social, political reform. And of course, that comes after denuclearizing and doing away with the sanctions that basically prevent such significant investment at this current stage. Daniel, I thought you had a question, then the lady in the front row, and then I'm afraid we might have to conclude, but let's see if we have a minute left. Please.
Daniel Wirth from the National Committee on North Korea. Thank you very much for your presentation and your report, Yonho. One thing that really stood out to me was your reference to long-distance transfers of money using these Servicha networks. My question is, have you come across any evidence that this isn't just limited to physical transfers of money, but that some of the networks supporting trade and Servicha are also providing credits and debits to merchants, essentially providing rudimentary private financial services?
Thank you for asking the question, because that issue was actually touched in my report, but I just tried to focus on money transfer directly related to the combination of cell phone and Servicha. But we have a lot of Donjus, and they have their own networks. So first of all, North Korea, they do have their own banking system, but people don't trust it, because once you make a deposit, there's no way you can get the money in full. So how can you do money transfer with your deposit? So that's why they're relying on the private money transfer network based on this network of Donju. So if you want to send your money from Pyongyang to Siniju, then all you need to do is approach the Donju in Pyongyang and let the Donjus in Pyongyang and Siniju talk to each other, and Donju in Siniju will give the money to the recipient. And you can easily verify the reception of your money by just calling on cell phone to your friend. So that kind of a very creative network they have. And there is another way. It is limited to a small amount of money, not money itself, but people can send their call minutes from their cell phone to whoever wants to get it. And because the call minutes are very valuable in the market, you're basically sending a very valuable item, and the one who gets the call minute can sell it by sending his call minute to somebody else, or you can approach professional call minute traders at the market. So that's a really popular way to bribe the unit commander of your son, and just asking them to treat your son nicely. And also, if you want to send a small amount of money to your business partner, that's a way you use.
We'll take one final question. Troy, you had a question too? Okay, we'll take both questions then.
what Dan was asking was not the banking system, but are any of the Dongju or any other business people doing business on credit, or is everything basically cash on delivery? So in other words, is there a private credit system for transactions developing?
And please.
Just curiosity, do the North Korean ever use text to communicate or just calls? And the other question is, would you say with the whole logistic revolution that is taking place in Korea, that actually can be helping the regime to survive because people now are, having a little more money and getting what they need?
I think, is this helping the regime to survive?
As for Troy's question and Dan's question, I'm sorry if I didn't get it right. Between the Tonjus, they have their own clearing system, so they don't have to meet every day, maybe once a month, and just compare their bookkeeping and what's the bottom line? How much do I owe you? Because this, again, is based on trust. Usually the Donju network doing this money transfer their business are your extended families usually. Really need strong relationship and trustworthiness. And text is, I was told, and in my first research paper on cell phones in North Korea, text message is the easiest thing to monitor for the regime. They have a lot of offices where you have a big monitor screen in the room, and I was told once you send a text message, it just pops up. Probably, voice call is a little bit harder, but they do have 3 years of transcript of voice call conversation. So whenever the police want to take a look at your conversation at specific time and date, they do have access to that.
Okay, unfortunately, we're out of time. I know you have more questions. Our two speakers, I hope, will be available for a few more minutes. Before we conclude, let me thank our colleague Carl Ferrier for organizing and our colleagues at KEI for hosting. Always great to work together. Thank you for joining us today. Have a wonderful rest of the afternoon.